Hi, welcome to Perp Miniatures. I'm going to be Kitbashing Madryc Helbane, an Abyssal Ferryman from the Necromunda Book of Desolation. I started with Galen Vendenst from the Cities of Sigmar line for the base model, assembling the body as normal. Madryc is described as a survivalist, and has lived his life believing that he's invincible, which is why I went with the Galen Vendenst model. He's older, and I see Madryc Helbane is getting into his older age, and the model has a feel to it that's a little flashy, but still has utility to it. After putting together the main part of the body, we move to the backpack. The base model comes with a long sword strapped into the bag, but that's not sci-fi enough, so I clipped it from the backpack and planned to replace it. I took a chainsword from the Genestealer cult Neophyte Hybrids kit, though any chainsword would probably work for this. After cutting the sword-wielding arm from the sprue, I checked that the size was just about the same. I clipped the arm holding the chainsword from the hilt, being careful not to damage the sword in the process, and trying my best to keep the hand intact so I could use this arm for something else down the line. After clipping the hand out, I was left with an empty space in the hilt where a handle should be, so I grabbed some plasticard rod and found one roughly the same size as the other part of the hilt, cutting a piece off and trimming it to size. The initial cut I made was a bit too long and was pushing the handguard out at a weird angle, so I trimmed the plasticard rod a little bit more. Once I was happy with the fit, I glued the plasticard rod into the chainsword with some plastic glue. I tested the chainsword size against the backpack, and made some adjustments to the backpack with my X-Acto knife. After I felt the backpack was in a good place, I cut the chainsword into two parts. Luckily, there was a line on the piece that made for a good splitting point that worked for where the sword would end up in the pack. I cleaned up both sides of the cut, and then drilled holes for pinning into both parts and the backpack. I had to make some further cuts to make the sword parts fit right onto the backpack, which I did by slowly cutting and scraping with my X-Acto knife until I was happy with the result. Then I glued the sword into place using some sprue glue. Once both sides of the chainsword were glued on, I checked to make sure it looked like the sword parts lined up and made some small adjustments in how they sat and left the glue to dry. Once that was done drying, I attached the backpack to the body. Before I assembled more of the base model, I wanted to add some extra gear onto Madryc's belt. For someone described as a survivalist, I figured he'd be packing a serious knife. So I grabbed a knife from the Necromunda Goliath gang kit and checked for its fit. Part of the body's belt was in the way, so I scraped that with my X-Acto knife to make the area flat, then put on a little bit of sprue glue to attach the knife. Next up is his weapon. Madryc Helbane is equipped with an Archaeotech pistol. In the base kit of Galen Vendenst has a flintlock pistol, which feels very archaic, but not quite sci-fi enough. So to start, I cut the pistol-wielding hand from the sprue and cleaned up the sprue tabs and mold lines. Then I started testing bits to add to the weapon. First up was a bit from the Skaven Stormfiend's kit, which at first was a bit too much hanging down from the pistol. I liked the canister just below the barrel though, so I cut everything below it off and flattened the side that would sit against the pistol. After testing the fit and where I wanted it to be glued on, I trimmed the hose coming off the canister so that it would rest against the hilt of the pistol cleanly. Then I glued the pieces together with a bit of sprue glue, because the fit wasn't completely flush, checking then that the canister was in line with the pistol and adjusting as needed. I also added a bit from the Adeptus Mechanicus Guittari backpack that looked like it could be a scope for the pistol, checked the fit and glued it on off to one side. Once I was happy with the result, I glued the arm to the model. Now that the pistol was glued to the body, I could attach the head with the right eyeline. I clipped out the Galen Vendenst head from the base model sprue and trimmed up any mold lines and sprue bits still attached. Gluing the head into place and checking that it looked like he was looking down the scope of the pistol. The Galen Vendenst model comes with an arm holding a torch, which I like the idea that Madryc Helbane would need some sort of a light while he was delving into the Hive Secundus abyss. But a torch feels too fantasy, so I changed it up a bit using mostly the arm from the Galen Vendenst kit. Since I would be turning the hand in a way the model wasn't designed for, I trimmed the connection flat and drilled holes for pinning. Gluing the hand into place but turned 90 degrees, with the palm facing down, I used sprue glue again on this joint so that any gaps would be filled by the glue. After the glue dried, I trimmed the parts of the torch that the hand was holding onto and cleaned up the hand. To make the torch look more like a lantern, I took the top of the torch and trimmed off all of the sculpted flame, being careful to keep as much of the torch intact as possible. Once that was all trimmed, I took a bit from the Genestealer cult Neophyte Hybrids kit and trimmed that and the torch bottom side flat, gluing them together with sprue glue to hide any gaps between the pieces. After they dried, I drilled a hole in the top of the lantern and the bottom side of the hand that would be holding it to pin the two together and glued them into place. To base the model, I cut a chunk of a building from the Kill Team Hivestorm box. I trimmed the ruined piece so it covered about half the base, trimming the detail from what would be the bottom side so it sat flush against the base. Once the piece was glued to the base, I came in with some clippers and trimmed so the ruined piece was rounded along the base. Finally, I drilled 2 holes into the feet of the model for pinning and tested positions on the base. After finding a good place and trying my best to mark it on the base by scraping the pins to show their locations, I drilled 2 more holes in the base and glued Madryc Helbane into place. And with that, Madryc Helbane is complete. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed your time here, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. See you next time.